They said Jehu's chariot sounded like a verdict. From a distance, you could tell the driver by the way dust lifted off the road, not in graceful plumes, but in ragged fists, as if the ground itself were being seized and shaken. Word had raced ahead of him already, how the soldier from Ramoth-Gilead had been called aside by a frantic young prophet, anointed with oil in a back room, and handed a single sentence that would set the northern kingdom on fire. "You shall strike down the house of Ahab." The door had slammed, the oil still fresh on his hair, and Jehu had stepped back into daylight with a purpose that made other men steady their cups before they dared drink. In Jezreel, the king of Israel, Joram, lay wounded from battle. King Ahaziah of Judah had come to visit him, a courtesy call between royal cousins with tangled loyalties. On the wall stood watchmen who had long since learned to read the road like scripture. "I see a company," one called. Riders went out to ask if the arriving force came in peace. They did not return. The watchman shaded his eyes and said the sentence a kingdom would remember. "The driving is like the driving of Jehu, son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously." Jehu arrived like a judgment. He loosed an arrow that took Joram through the heart as the king turned his chariot to flee. He spoke a verse of remembered prophecy over the falling body as if it were an already written caption. Ahaziah ran too and died on a road southward, the shock rippling into Judah in days to come. In Jezreel, the painted Queen Jezebel leaned from her window with a royal insult. A few weary eunuchs chose their moment and let her fall. Dogs licked what the city swept away. By dusk, the blood debt of Naboth's vineyard and a nation's long provocation had been answered with a speed that kept brave men quiet. But the throne in Samaria still sat above 70 sons and grandsons of Ahab, princes raised in the care of city elders and guardians who had fattened themselves on the palace's shade. Jehu understood how power nests inside networks. He sent letters north with the cold politeness of a man offering his enemies a choice designed to fail. "Select the best and fittest of your master's sons, set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." The elders read the letters against the memory of that dust, of a driver who did not break for ceremony, and felt their courage turn brittle. They wrote back like men who had suddenly remembered their mortality. "We are your servants. We will do all that you command." So Jehu wrote again, the way a prosecutor sets the next exhibit on the table. If they were his servants, let them prove it. "Take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel by tomorrow at this time." The guardians looked at one another and heard, under the clean scratch of the scribe's reed, the heavy footfall of consequences. Loyalty had a clock on it now. Before that sun had finished its arc, 70 princes were dead. Boys and men who had grown up thinking history would come visit them politely. Their heads were placed in baskets, the lids tied neat as market loads, and sent down the road that every tax and favor had traveled the other way. A city that had once sent tribute now sent proof of obedience. In Jezreel, the sentry announced the wagon's arrival. Jehu ordered the heads piled in 2 heaps by the city gate, stacked at eye level so that commerce would brush against consequence. Morning came with a crowd, as mornings do when rumor is hot. Jehu stepped out and spoke the speech of a man who intends both terror and absolution. "You are righteous," he said, as if handing out a verdict the crowd could keep. "I conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all these?" He lifted his hand toward the grim columns beside the gate. The point was obvious. This was not a lone man's crime. It was a national decision. "Know, then, that nothing of the word of the Lord shall fall to the ground." It sounded like theology. It also sounded like a blade being wiped clean. The purge widened. Jezreel still sheltered officials loyal to Ahab's line, courtiers, priests, captains who had built their careers on flatteries Jehu no longer needed. He hunted them with the efficiency of a man cleaning out a stable that had been allowed to rot. Then he climbed into his chariot and turned the horses toward Samaria, the capital built by Omri and beautified by Ahab, the city that had married idols to convenience and called it policy. On the road, he met a company of men wearing good clothes and the wrong expressions, the relatives of Ahaziah, Judah's king, on their way to visit the princes and the sons of the queen mother. They spoke the old names cheerfully, as if history had not changed in the last day. Jehu heard their mission, weighed it the way a butcher weighs meat, and had them seized at the pit of Beth-eked. 42 men, one blow after another, the dust drinking what the ground would not say out loud. News rode south with the speed of fear. A short distance later, Jehu met a figure who had not come by accident, Jehonadab, son of Rechab, a leader of a desert clan whose code prized tents over houses, restraint over display. Jehu asked if his heart was straight, and when Jehonadab said it was, Jehu reached down and pulled him into the chariot, a gesture that yokes reputations. "Come with me, and see my zeal for the Lord." It is a dangerous sentence when spoken by men with swords. It means that blood and piety are about to share a stage. In Samaria, zeal learned a new efficiency. Jehu called for a great sacrifice to Baal, the imported god whose altars had braided themselves into public life. Ahab served Baal a little. Jehu will serve Baal much, he said with a smile that invited fools closer. Messengers went out in all Israel, summoning prophets and priests and worshippers of Baal to a high festival. They came in their costumes and with their incense, relieved to see a new king who, they thought, had read the weather correctly. Jehu dressed them in vestments that marked them for death and set guards at the doors to let no one escape and to keep the curious out. He offered up the theater of devotion until the room smelled of sacrifice and confidence. Then he gave the signal. Soldiers rushed in. The temple's joy turned into noise that did not sound like prayer. When they were done, the building itself was dismantled stone by stone and turned into a latrine, a practical joke written in architecture, a message no worshiper could ever miss again. So ends the case for the prosecution, you might say. The house of Ahab lay dismantled. Jezebel's makeup had washed into dust. The prophets of a foreign god had learned the price of their invitations. Jehu's ledger under the heading Zeal was full. Under another heading, the divine court wrote something more hesitant. Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat. He kept the golden calves at Bethel and Dan, the convenient substitutes for worship that looked patriotic and felt easy. He broke one chain and chose to leave another on the ankle, lengthened perhaps, but not removed. God promised him 4 generations on Israel's throne for the justice he had executed. In the same breath, the scripture notes that Hazael of Aram began cutting Israel short along its borders. Judgment had been meted out to Ahab. Judgment, in another register, now came for Israel. At the city gate, where the 2 piles had stood at dawn, the sun climbed and the flies found what had been offered to them. Merchants stepped past with their heads bowed in the way people adopt when they must pretend not to look at what they are looking at. Mothers steered children along another path. An old man with a cap mended twice walked slower than usual and said nothing. The heaps were taken down eventually, carted away to whatever ground receives the proofs regimes grow tired of. Yet the image refused to be carted from memory. 70 heads at the gate, a king speaking to a crowd about righteous necessity, a nation trying to believe it had not chosen this, and discovering that, in a way, it had. What do you do with a story like this, where prophecy and politics braid themselves into a whip, and a man who serves justice also serves his own future? Divine crime keeps a ledger, but not the kind accountants love. In one column, we write the rightness of ending a dynasty that taught Israel to treat covenant like a market stall. In another column, we write the terror of letters that tell guardians to deliver heads by tomorrow noon. Between the columns stands a sentence Jehu never fully learned. Obedience that begins with God, but settles for convenience, ends as another form of idolatry. You can smash Baal's temple and still pray to a golden calf if the calf looks like national strength. Jehu died and was buried in Samaria. His sons ruled after him as promised, each inheriting the complicated blessing their father had won with a chariot's dust and a prophet's oil. The border stones kept moving. The people kept returning to high places when the crops seemed to need a little help. And the gate where those heaps once stood remained a gate, busy with traffic and gossip, as if the city could talk itself back into innocence by the sheer energy of ordinary days. But memory is a witness with a long appointment book. Somewhere in Israel, a storyteller would point his chin towards Samaria and tell a child about the morning when baskets arrived and the word zeal wore a face too sharp to forget. He would add the warning the nation never liked to hear, that the Lord who keeps his word about judgment also keeps his word about mercy, and that both can cut. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.